Well, welcome to session 2 of Development Day. My name is Ebony Thoria-Kula, Public Sector Relationship Specialist with the Institute, and I'll be your host for this session. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people, the traditional custodians of Meanjin, Brisbane, which is where the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today as well. In the fast-paced world of today's workplace, we know how vital it is to ensure our team members feel safe and valued. We all want to work in a place where we can freely exchange ideas, feel supported, and thrive. In this session, we'll dive into the fascinating world of building psychological safety through team engagement. We'll talk about why it's so important, fantastic benefits it brings, not only to ourselves, but to the organisations that we work in, and how to actually make it happen by incorporating tools like David Rock's SCARF model. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for the session today, Associate Fellow of the Institute, Shannon Cooper. Shannon, who you may be familiar with from previous development days, has a knack for seeing how people could be, but also the skills and disciplined approach to help them realise this potential. His refreshing, energetic and interactive approach has been known to empower employees, thrill customers and embolden entire organisations. Shannon has worked with teams both big and small, single and multi-site businesses, helping lead big impact leadership programs. He's achieved success from the boardroom to the shop floor and from head office to the site shed. By way of housekeeping, if you have any questions at any stage throughout this webinar, please feel free to post them in the chat function and we'll cover off at the end of the session if time permits. Also like to mention that the action plan was sent to you in the reminder email yesterday, but we'll pop it in the chat function if you would like to access it during the session. All right, over to you, Shannon.
Hey, thank you so much, Ebony, and good morning to everyone who's jumped on board today. It's great to be here. Always fantastic to see so many of our members joining us for our development days. And if this is our first time working together, or this is our first time interacting, even though virtual, it's wonderful to be here sharing the morning with you. For those of you that I've worked with before, welcome. Wonderful to see you again as well. So I want to start off with a bit of a reflection. I want you to take a moment. I want you to draw a breath, and I want you to take a little moment to reflect on the best boss that you have ever worked with. I want you to take a moment, the best boss that you've ever worked with. And I want you to reflect back on the time when you were working with them. Maybe that time is right now for some of you, but I want you to reflect on what that was like for you. And then what I want you to do, I want you to think about how you feel or felt when you were working with this particular boss, this particular leader. How would you describe your emotions when you were working with this person? And I would love for you to type that into the chat box. Jordana's just said that it might be a little bit blurry. So if there's a bit of an issue there, let me know and we can fix this up. So we can do that. But I want you to take a moment to reflect on what they are like. Beautiful. Got some words coming through. Free, trusted, supported, motivated, safe. Yeah, there we go. Empowered, valued, stretched. I love this. Fantastic. Encouraged. Look at all these wonderful words coming through. I love this. Honest. Yeah. Included. Thank you. Esther, supported. Thank you. Driven. Yeah. Give me a go. Yeah. Thank you. Right? So now I want you to stay in that moment reflecting on this wonderful boss that you've worked with. And I would now like you to think about how you would describe your performance when you were working with this particular person. So if I was watching you, what would I have noticed about how you perform? Lifetime best, Andrew. I love that. Interested at work. Yeah, absolutely. I was motivated. I was autonomous, elevated from Laura. Thank you. Yeah, smooth, positive. Yeah, grew a lot. Thank you, Sarah. Diligent, driven, productive from Hashama. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, way better than my previous boss, says Tim. Thank you, mate. Thank you. I was at my best self. Yeah, perfect. So I want you to hold on to that for a moment. So that was what it was like, and hopefully this might be the leader that you're working with now. But nonetheless, seems like it was a wonderful experience for you. So now I want to shift gear a little bit. And I want to do the same, but this time I want you to think about the worst boss that you have ever worked with. And I want you to do the same thing. I want you now to type into the chat box, how would you have described your emotional state when you were working for this particular leader? I know this is a bit of a downer, folks. I know this is a little bit different, but the worst boss you've ever worked with, how would you describe how you felt? Well, look at these words coming through. Disappointed, unmotivated, confused, or bitter. Yeah, anxious, devalued, self-doubt. Yep. Yeah. Frustrated, scared. Yeah. These are exhausted, anxious. Look at these words coming through. Yeah. Hopefully for many of you, this is not the leader that you're currently working with. Yeah. Oh, it's illegal from Tim. Yeah. Depressed, deflated. Yeah. And what about your performance? So the second part of that question there is, how would you have described your performance when you were working with this particular person? So if I was watching you from afar, what would I have noticed? What would I have seen? Yeah, combative, tentative, not engaged. Yep, disengaged, scatterbrained. Yeah, basic level. Yep, do the bare minimum. Yeah, struggling for Miller. Yep, yep. Lagging. Yeah, forsaken. Oh, this is terrible. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Pissed off. Yeah. Tired. Yeah. Yeah. So let's just pause there for a moment and let's reflect a little bit on what's happened here. Whoops, I want to go to here. Oh, what's happened there? There we go. Bit of weirdness there. There we go. Let's just reflect on what's happening here in both of these circumstances. So this is a little bit of the background of neuroscience, and this will help us understand exactly our experiences when we've worked with those fantastic leaders, as well as when we've worked with those less than fantastic leaders. So here's what happens. As we're going about our work, whether we're working for a great leader or a poor leader or anything in between, as we're going about our work, right, we are shaped by and influenced by a whole host of different interactions that we have with the people around us. In this case, let's just reflect on those leaders. So every conversation, every meeting, every email, every telephone call, Teams, chat message, whatever it might be, there's all of these different types of events, and we are using each of our five senses to consume those events. So we're seeing stuff, we're hearing stuff, energetically, we're noticing stuff, and that sensory data, information that comes from those different interactions, enters into our brain. And in simple terms, the first place that it kind of stops is what we might call our emotional brain, right? So it's the kind of the complex of components that kind of sits at the back of our brain there. And what happens is that this emotional brain, or sometimes called our limbic brain. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not qualified to use those fancy terms like limbic brain, but we'll just keep it we'll call it our emotional brain. And the emotional brain decides, based on all the sum part of all that sensory data, it is like, righto, how do I feel about this? Do I feel safe or do I feel not safe, based on how all that kind of sensory data synthesizes together? So sometimes we might say that we lean towards either what we might call a reward response, right? Where we feel safe, valued, respected. All those words that you associated with your best boss, all those emotions that you experienced are akin to how our brain thinks about a reward response. On the flip side, when that sensory data combines to make us feel anxious, nervous, angry, worried, unsafe, all of those words that you shared with me when you were working with your less than best boss, our emotional brain, associates that with a bit of a threat response. Think about this, right? If you are in an extreme circumstance of threat, you're being chased by the metaphorical saber-toothed tiger, that's how you would feel. You'd feel pretty anxious, nervous, maybe worried, and a little bit tentative. And our emotional brain, in that moment, it doesn't know whether we're working for a lousy boss or we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. Right, and a similar with a reward response, right? Our emotional brain acts in relative terms in quite a simple way. It's designed to work out on some part, where are we sort of operating? Are we good, reward response, or are we in danger with a threat response? That sensory data then navigates and moves its way through to our thinking brain, the cerebral part of our brain. It's another one of those fancy terms that I probably shouldn't use, but whatever. Our cerebral brain, the front part of our brain, and our thinking brain says, okay, based on what I'm feeling, right, whether I'm having a reward response or a threat response, what should we do about that? What should our emotional response be? And what we know, of course, intuitively, but also backed by neuroscience, is that when we have a positive response, a reward response, our behavior tends to be somewhat productive. We tend to be resourceful, creative, engaged, motivated. We work in a very focused, expansive way, right? Which is why when you are working with your best boss who makes you feel valued, respected, etc., you usually find that you bring your best self to work. On the flip side, when you work for your worst ever boss and you have some of those negative threat type responses, your behavior is a lot more tentative. Your behavior is a lot more unproductive. In fact, your engagement kind of sinks to new levels of low. Now, this is fascinating because as leaders, we can use this. We can use this type of understanding to think about how we can unlock levels of engagement and how we can create and sustain very safe working environments. Now, the world of neuroscience, as you can imagine, quite a complex field to understand. Now, fortunately for us, when it comes to turning this into something that's practical and useful, there is a gentleman by the name of David Rock. Isn't that a cool name, David Rock? Almost sounds like he should be a WWE wrestler or something like that. But not only has David Rock got a cool name, he came up with something that's pretty cool as well, and it's called the SCARF model. David Rock is an Australian and he's a neuroscientist. And in 2008, he published a body of work that introduced us to something called the SCARF model. And the SCARF model is a framework that helps us understand or categorize the types of the types of events that will typically drive people towards a positive reward response, or conversely, drive people towards a negative threat type of response. And it's these categories that give rise to the SCARF model. SCARF is an acronym. I'm going to reveal that in just a moment. It gives us a real tactical and practical way for thinking about how we can create and sustain high levels of engagement and high levels of psychological safety. So let me share with you a little bit about what the SCARF model is and reveal to you what each one of those elements, the S, the C, the A, and the R, and the F, indeed do stand for. So it is the first piece of the SCARF model is the S, and the S is for status. And status is all about our relative sense of importance to other people. So think about this, right? When we're working in an environment where we feel as though we matter, we feel as though our opinions are valued, then we feel good, we feel important. We're much more likely to have something that's akin to a reward response. On the flip side, if we're working in an environment where we don't feel that we matter, our thoughts and opinions, our perspectives are diminished in some way, our ideas aren't sought, when we feel as though people are going around us to get stuff done, overlooking the value that we can add to the team or the organization, then that doesn't feel very good, right? It causes a level of maybe nervousness or worry or anxiety or just maybe even frustration, right? All those emotions that are more akin to a threat response. The C in SCARF stands for certainty. And this is all about our ability to predict the future. Now, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of us have well, not a real one anyway, a DeLorean time machine that we can just sort of dial in a day into the flux capacitor and be able to launch into the future, right? So none of us have an absolute ability to be able to predict the future. However, us humans, we find a level of comfort when we can indeed predict the future. And what we want to be able to do is come to work and be able to have a degree of certainty about how things are going to work. We want to know how we're going to be treated, how we're going to be spoken to. We want to have a degree of consistency in terms of how policies and procedures are implemented. We hope that there is a degree of authentic consistency in terms of how our leaders behave. And when we can come to work and there is is a degree of certainty, then again, we feel assured. On the flip side, if there is a low degree of certainty, then we may feel a little bit anxious, a little bit cautious in how we go about our work. In other words, something that's more akin to a threat response. The A in SCARF stands for autonomy. And autonomy is about our capacity to exercise a level of decision making and have a sense of control over what is happening here. So we all like to have a sense of control. We all like to feel as though the decisions that we make will not only determine what happens to us, but from an organisational sense, hopefully that we can have a level of influence over the team or the organisation's outcomes. And of course, when we don't have that sense of autonomy, we often feel micromanaged. I think a few of you wrote that term in there. You know, when we feel as though, well, we don't get to make any decisions, we're not empowered to exercise any level of authority over anything. It's very diminishing, right, to work with that type of micromanagement. On the flip side, when we are given the opportunity to feel empowered, to demonstrate a level of autonomy, it feels good, right? It feels invigorating. We feel as though we're trusted. We feel as though we're empowered. We feel as though our experience has a level of value and level of currency, right? In other words, a reward response. Then we move to the R, and the R in SCARF stands for relatedness. Now, this, of course, many higher theories around motivation talk about the fact that we are social beings and we like to feel as though we belong and that we're connected to others. So relatedness is all about how connected we feel. So if status is all about our level of importance within the group, relatedness is, yeah, but how connected do I feel? Do I feel that you and I can get along? Do I feel a level of trust? Do I feel as though we can resolve conflicts and differences? Do I feel like we can collaborate and work towards consensus and positive outcomes, etc.? Do I feel included within the group? And of course, when we do, we feel good. And when we're ostracized from the group, where we feel like we don't belong, when there's low levels of trust, etc., it's when those threat responses often kick in. And then we have the F, and the F stands for fairness. And this is about our perception of equality that we have. So this is all about, well, do I feel as though I'm being, for example, rewarded and recognised equally and fairly to other people? Do I feel as though I'm being given opportunities maybe to speak up and share my ideas, opportunities for growth and development in a way that is fair and equitable with others that I see within my organisation or my team? And on the flip side, if I feel as though I'm not being afforded those opportunities, I'm not being treated fairly, that others may be getting greater levels of reward or opportunity than what I am, then I might feel as though that's unfair. And again, that can lead to something that is more akin to a threat response. So this SCARF model is a way of just thinking about and conceptualizing. You think about the best leader that you ever worked with, likelihood was that some of these elements, if not all of these elements of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness were present for you. That best leader that you worked with probably pulled each one of these levers in a positive way for you. And on the flip side, the negative leader, the worst leader that you ever worked with, chances are that maybe drove these down a negative way. Maybe you didn't feel as though you had a level of status. Maybe there was a lack of certainty, etc., etc. So we can use this, right? We can use this to think about our own leadership. You can use this to think about our own behaviours. And we can also use it to think about, well, when levels of engagement or psychological safety might not be to the level that we want, we can think about how we might be able to course correct or build that higher level of engagement, that higher level of safety, that higher level of motivation. So let me show you how to do that. And again, if you've got any questions about the background of the model, we will be sending you an article or a snapshot summary of David Rock's initial research. But if you've got any questions, please towards the end, hit me up and I'll do my very best to answer those for you. So let's think about this. So if we think about the SCARF model, and here I want to introduce maybe some sliders, right? Where on not the eating sliders, it's almost lunchtime. It depends on what time zone you're in, but for those of you not those type of sliders, but I want you to look at the scarf model as existing on some sliders where we have the threat response on the left-hand side and the reward response on the right-hand side. So let's just think about this, right? Where we have an element of neutral safety, right? Where people come to work and there's an element of safety, there's a level of engagement. The scarf model, everything might be to a degree of equilibrium. Everything's kind of in the middle, right? On the flip side, let's think about this, right? Let's say that there is a lack of safety, right? For whatever reason, where people come to work and each one of those scarf elements are on the left-hand side. We shouldn't be surprised then if people aren't performing at their best. We shouldn't be surprised if there is a lack of motivation. We shouldn't be surprised if there's a lack of resourcefulness, a lack of independence, ultimately a lack of successful outcomes that are being achieved, because that's what happens, right? This person or the people within our team are sort of operating from the threat state, and that's not conducive to high levels of performance, right? And here's what a highly safe environment might look like. So this is the complete opposite, right? This is where we've got people working towards more of the reward state. Maybe this is like you when you were working for your best ever leader, right? So the reality is, though, that most environments aren't kind of like this. And this kind of model and this framework and each one of these elements and creating a highly psychologically safe environment, an environment that leads to high levels of engagement and performance. A nice little metaphor is to think about it from the perspective of a plant, right? You've got to get the conditions right. You've got to sort of make sure that everything is correct, the pH and the soil, and that you're watering it enough and it's got enough sunlight. And that's the job of us as leaders. It's to be that gardener. It's to be attentive to what's going on and then to think about the approach that we take, right? If we give this too much water, then it's problematic. If we don't give it enough water, then it's problematic. So let me give you a bit of an example of what we're talking about. So let's imagine that you are working in a particular environment where you've got a team member and they come along to a meeting. Maybe it's like a brainstorming meeting where everyone is being invited to put forward some ideas, to put forward some thoughts, to share some ways that we can improve what's happening within the organization or within the team. And let's imagine within that meeting that someone shares an idea and they share their idea with the rest of the group. And then someone else in the team turns around and says, well, that's a dumb idea. What made you think of that? That'll never work. Or, oh, that's just another one of your harebrained ideas. You can see how in that moment, maybe even as innocuous as those comments might mean, and maybe there's a hint of sarcasm, maybe there's even just a hint of humor, maybe there isn't really any real level of malicious intent behind them. But the fact that those things are out there can lead through to that person having their status diminished, moving that S across to the left-hand side, where now that person, I put forward an idea and it was kind of rejected pretty quickly. Maybe there were some few jokes or a few sarcastic comments made about it. You can imagine how that person would feel. And in that moment, that status goes over to the left. And that doesn't mean that it necessarily stays over there, but it's moved over there, certainly for that moment. So we shouldn't be surprised that in the rest of that meeting, and perhaps for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, depending on what's happened, that person's emotional response is going to drive their behavior, right? They're not going to be as productive, certainly in that meeting, but maybe for the rest of the day or the rest of the week as well, until a normal state of equilibrium is achieved again. Now, this can become even more problematic because imagine now that not only has that person's idea been shouted down, but maybe there are others within the team whose ideas are listened to with a little bit higher levels of curiosity. Maybe other people's ideas are explored with a little bit more rigor than what theirs was. Maybe there were some other people who had some similar ideas that were discussed with more energy than what there was. In other words, now all of a sudden, I'm going to feel as though not only is my status diminished, but now also this isn't fair. this isn't fair that their ideas are discussed and not mine. So now we've got someone who is operating with two of these elements down towards the low end of the scarf model. And it's the reason that I wanted to share this example with you is because often the things that drive and move these sliders, these scarf sliders, aren't always massive, significant events. They can be redundancies, or sometimes it might be around significant organizational change. That they can have a significant impact. But the reality is, folks, for each and every one of you, it's not necessarily these big things. It's often the small things that compound. It's the little cultural nuances that exist within your team and your organization that have an impact on whether or not people feel safe, and therefore how their level of engagement, their level of emotional response, and ultimately their level of performance. And it's these small things that we need to be alert to. It's these small things that allow us to not only notice, but to course correct, to create high levels of scarf and high levels of safety. And what I want to do in the time remaining today is give you a few different ideas and tactics that you can use with each one of these scarf frameworks to get you thinking about your leadership, to get you thinking about your team and your organization. But I'm going to present it in two ways. I'm going to share with you some of the elements within some ideas within each one of the elements, almost like some do's and don'ts, to help you understand the types of things that create positive and some of the things that can create negative. So see if a few of you are making some comments. Are you going to get copies of the slides? Yes, you will, but I also encourage you to have a pen handy so that you can write down some of these ideas as we go through. So let's kick off. Let's have a look, first of all, at status. So here's a few tips that we can use. These are the types of things that will drive a positive reward response under the umbrella of status. So making sure that we are clear around mutual needs and acknowledging the importance of the relationship. So what do we mean by that? What we want to do is we want people to understand that their needs and expectations of work, whatever it is that they need in terms of a good working environment, a safe working environment, a team environment, your needs are just as important as everyone else's. So tell me, what is it that you need? What is it that you're looking for? What's important to you? And particularly if you've got teams that are working in the hybrid setting as well, having these discussions and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to contribute is a great way of increasing status. Making sure that, particularly during times of conflicts or difference, that we take the time to seek other people's perspectives into play. So whether you're working on a project or you're trying to make a decision or resolve a conflict, whenever there is a likelihood of a difference, take the time as a leader to seek out an understanding of the perception of the different parties at play. In other words, don't just seek out one point of view and not take into account the other person's point of view, because the other person's view is potentially causing a little bit of diminished status. And then finally, what we also want to do is draw on the thoughts of other people's ideas and opinions. So what I mean by that is to make sure that when there is something going on, be active. Ask people, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? What's your view? What's your perspective? What do you think we could do? What might be some of the dangers? What might be some of the risks? What might be some of the rewards? So, seek out other people's thoughts and opinions. Be proactive in engaging in those conversations, whether it's in your one-on-ones or team meetings. And on the flip side, the drivers of threat responses, you can see that some of the things here. So telling people, the first point there, suggestions from someone that you can improve in specific areas. I think one of the things that we need to understand is that when we give people feedback, we should give people feedback. We should give them some advice, or we should offer maybe some suggestions on how they could improve. But we need to understand that often when we deliver that, even if it's delivered very well with positive intentions, it can cause a bit of a threat response. Right? Often when we talk about delivering feedback, part of the understanding is that when we deliver it, even though it's positive and it's delivered exceptionally well, people will often feel a little bit threatened by that feedback. So just know that when you give people feedback, that the status can take a bit of a hit. someone diminishing thoughts or ideas, we've already spoken about that. Just be really conscious of how you respond to people's ideas. What's the sarcasm? What's the way that if you want to give people some constructive feedback on their ideas, just know that it can cause a bit of a threat response. And then the last idea on this slide here is people going over the top of you to get what they want. And if you've ever worked in an environment where that happens, where someone goes around you or goes over you to your boss to get something done, you'll know how frustrating that can be. So I think that's something to be alert to as well. Make sure that if there is a particular sort of hierarchy, or there's a particular channels or modes of communication, just know that consistency and status means that those things need to be adhered to. So you might want to be thinking as you look at some of those tips there. And I've just got, looking at the chat box there, these seem to be a bit blurry for some people. Zoom can be funny sometimes with the resolution. So hopefully that clears up for you. If it doesn't, for those of you that can't read it, we will send you a copy of the slides. But you might want to reflect on some of these and think about some of the things that you do or need to do more of, or need to do less of as well, and maybe make a little bit of a note of those, either on your action plan or on a piece of paper. So let's have a look at certainty. So certainty is, this is remembering about our degree of ability for us to be able to take the future. So what this is all about is, first of all, making sure that you are consistent with what you say and do. So don't be the type of leader that does one thing and says something else, right? If you're the type of leader that makes a commitment, then follow through with it. Because if you're the type of leader that is consistently, not fulfilling their promises, or you say that you're going to get something done, but then you don't get it done, or say that you're going to follow up for something, but then forget about it. And again, you might have some legitimate reasons for it, but that creates a significant degree of uncertainty within your team members. Make sure that you are clear on expectations. Don't have an environment where we want to give people a level of autonomy, but people come to work and I want to know, how are things going to work around here? If I do this, what happens? If I don't do this, what happens? Make sure that there are levels of just consistency in how things are done. And again, particularly if you're working in a bit of a hybrid setting or a fully virtual setting, as well as in the physical setting, is there a degree of cadence and rhythm in terms of when we catch up, how we share what we're working on, making sure that status updates are regularly reported? Because if you come to work and you're like, oh, geez, I'm waiting for someone to do something, I wonder whether they've done it. I wonder whether they're working on that. Now, it might be easy if we're working in a co-located way. It helps for people to be able to, just walk over to the desk and say, hey, how you going with that thing, right? But if we're working in a virtual setting, I can't just walk over to the desk, and I might send a bit of a text message through or a Teams message through and say, hey, how you going with that thing? And of course, people might see that as a bit of a threat response. What, don't you trust me? Yeah, I'm working on it, right? So all of those communication things can come into play and can impact certainty. Continually communicating on progress and keeping promises, another way to create a sense of certainty as well. So making sure, are you being transparent about what you're working on, the progress, the challenges that you've made? Be open. Daily stand-ups, things like that can create a degree of certainty. And on the flip side, the types of things that can drive a negative response are things like people not telling the truth, right? When people are duplicitous, of course, people who do not keep promises or continually miss deadlines on projects, or unknown expectations, not knowing how things are supposed to work. Working hard on something, thinking that you're doing a really good job, only to find out that, oh, hang on, that's not what we were looking for, or that doesn't quite cut muster. And you're like, well, I didn't know that that's what I was supposed to do, or I didn't know that that's the deadline, or I didn't know that I was supposed to have that much done by this date, or that type of stuff creates frustration and anxiety and nervousness in amongst all of that. So we want to avoid doing those things. Let's look at autonomy now. So this is the A within the SCARF model. So I touched on this earlier, is that we want to give people opportunities to make decisions and influence outcomes. So think about that. Think about the skills and the knowledge and the experience of people within your team, and are you affording them enough of an opportunity to leverage their skill and their knowledge? Are they empowered to make decisions? Right. Certainty means that I know what the limitations of my influence are. Certainty means that I'm clear on where I can make decisions and where I might need to make decisions. Oh yes, sure, Jennifer. Jennifer's obviously taking some notes there. There you go. And but autonomy means that I have an appropriate level of autonomy. Most people understand that certain things have to be rubber stamped. Certain things have to be signed off by other levels or higher levels of management or leadership. But what I want to know is that I need to understand where my decision-making authority and delegation power sits. Make sure that we are generally being consultative and exploratory. By that, I mean, just let's make sure that the people have the ability to be able to contribute in conversations and decisions. Be flexible and open-minded to other people's ideas as well. In other words, don't be the type of person that says, look, it's my way or the highway. Have a level of openness. Maybe let people try to do something their way. Let them experiment a little bit. Maybe try some different modalities of working based on the experience or the knowledge or the insight or the ideas of other people. And on the flip side, the types of things that will often create a bit of a threat response, of course, being micromanaged. That's the biggest one with autonomy. If you've ever worked with a micromanager, and I know some of you have, you'll know exactly what that is like. Not consulting people in things that impact their work. Right. So if there is going to be a major decision or a change or a project sort of realignment or whatever it might be, and it's going to impact someone's work, then have a chat to them about it, consult with them on it. Doesn't mean that you have to make a different decision based on that consultancy, but just consulting with people, seeking out their opinion can help them have a much more positive scarf response. And then finally, the other thing, completely inflexible work practices. This is a massive challenge for many organizations at the moment, particularly as we're navigating some of the return to work dynamics. What degree of flexibility should we be providing our people? Increasingly, people are telling us that they want more flexibility in their working arrangements. And flexibility gives a sense of autonomy. A lack of flexibility decreases people's level of autonomy. And this is one of the most challenging ones to navigate at the moment. But here's what you need to know. If you have completely inflexible working arrangements, in other words, you are demanding that people come into the office on these days and maybe those days don't suit them, then we shouldn't be surprised if there is a bit of a scarf response. It doesn't mean that we have to necessarily cater to those expectations. All I'm saying is be alert to the impact and the consequences of those decisions and how we might need to offset that with some other areas. Let's look at relatedness. So relatedness, be authentic. Be real with people. Be open with people. Be genuine with who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses with other people. Take the time to be curious and learn about other people as well, their likes, their dislikes, their motivations, things like that. Make sure that we take the time to establish shared needs or goals. Spoke a little bit about this within status. Take the time to talk about how we want to work together. Build rapport, common ground. As a leader, again, particularly if your team is working in the hybrid setting, you have to be very implicit about the way that you go. Very explicit about the ways that you go about building your team. Engage in team building activities. Give them opportunities to get to know each other. On the flip side, the things that can often lead to threat responses here is where we have different employee types. So what we mean by this is that when you've got, it's hard to build relationships with people if there's significant turnover, right? Or we've got, some people who are on different sort of contract or permanent or part-time or whatever it is. Now, the reality is, of course, most organizations have this, right? So I'm not saying don't do it. But what we do need to know is that where we have all these different types of things going on, when there's a lot of dynamism and change and upheaval in the working environment, it's very difficult for people to build relationships, of course. Right? Or it might be difficult for me to build a relationship if my employment status is different to yours. right? Because you're a contractor and I'm a permanent part-time person. You can sense how sometimes that can be a bit weird for people. It's like, well, what type of relationship do I want to have with you? Because your contract's up in a few months, so do I invest time with you or not? So that can just create a little bit of a chink in the armor, if you like. Silo culture and mentality, keeping people abreast, away from each other, not allowing teams to cross-pollinate and to share, not allowing your team to maybe explore what other teams across the organization is doing. That can create a chink in the relatedness area as well. And then finally, having colleagues who are guarded about their thoughts and feelings. We know what that's like. If you've ever worked with a colleague or a manager, and you can tell, right? You can tell if they're feeling a little bit, dismissive or a little bit anxious. And you ask them and you say, well, hey, what's wrong? Are you okay? And they go, no, I'm fine. Oh, really? Are you sure? No, I'm fine. I'm good. Okay. We know that they're not. And in that moment, it creates a level of uncertainty. It creates a level of nervousness, maybe worry that we've done something to upset them. Right. And again, that doesn't mean that everyone has to be an oversharer, but we just need to know that if we haven't got the type of environment where people can be open about how they're feeling, open about what they're thinking, open about their challenges, etc., then it can have a significant impact on the relationships that are being built. And then finally, of course, we have the fairness. So what we want to try to do here to create this sense of autonomy is around transparent decisions. Make sure that when we do make a decision, that we are as transparent as we can be around the rationale for that decision. Now, and I keep saying this doesn't mean that every decision has to be fully transparent, because again, most people are pretty rational and logical, and they understand that in any organization, big or small, that leaders are going to make decisions. And sometimes we're not going to be privy to the nuts and bolts and the full rationale and details behind that decision. I kind of get that, right? And people who come and work with you get that. But let's try to be as transparent as we can be around decisions that are made. Make sure that as a leader, you take a level of ownership and responsibility for issues. This is a bit of, the above the line versus below the line leadership, right? Or another way of thinking about this is don't throw people under the bus, don't blame other people. As a leader, take a level of accountability and responsibility. Don't blame other people for what's happened. Right? And certainly don't blame your team or your colleagues when things don't necessarily go to plan. Making sure that both parties are happy with a negotiated outcome. So again, when we're resolving a conflict or we're negotiating either within the team or across different teams within the organization, fairness says before we move forward, we just try to check that is everyone reasonably happy with the outcome? And of course, if we've got a compromise solution, or in some cases, not everyone is going to be completely jovial about the decision that we've made. However, we might be happy enough to move forward. And fairness means that before we move forward, we just take the time to take that temperature and make sure that everyone is as comfortable as they can be with that outcome. The types of things that will cause a threat response in this area, of course, are things like where, we've got different rules for different people. We play favourites, if you like. Right? Now, of course, none of us would ever admit to playing favourites, but sometimes we have a level of unconscious bias that kicks in. Right? Sometimes we might favour one person over another based on a whole stack of stuff that is completely unconscious to us. So there's an extra element of self-awareness that comes into play here. When we have environments where we've got different people doing the same type of work, but being paid different amounts. In other words, wage and pay inequality. That can have a significant impact on people's level of fairness as well. And if you've ever experienced that where you felt as though, hang on, I'm doing just as much work, or the work that I'm doing has just as much value as my colleague over there, but I'm being paid significantly less than that, that can have a real impact on people's level of fairness. Again, and that's consistent with other theories around motivation as well. And then finally, inequalities such as lack of diversity or bias in opportunities. So this might be, if you're working in a particular organization where certain groups of people or certain people with certain backgrounds or levels of experience or qualifications seem to get more opportunities than perhaps other people. And I'm not just talking about, gender biases here or race or national stuff, but this thing can exist in lots of different ways. So it's very, very important to understand that, what are the biases that exist in terms of how we are giving people opportunities for growth, opportunities for development, opportunities for secondment, because sometimes there's some unconscious bias that we might be blind to, but it's triggering people in this fairness area. Yeah. So the SCARF model, it's a really, really powerful tool that hopefully in this short time that we've had together today has got you thinking about your own leadership and the type of environment that you are creating. And ultimately, if you want to create an environment that is conducive to high levels of positive behaviour, high levels of strong decision-making, and high levels of performance, then we want to create an environment where people are operating towards the reward side of the SCARF model. That is an environment where they feel as though their importance, they feel as though they can predict the future. There's a degree of consistency and certainty in how they go awake, how they go about their work. There is a level of autonomy. They feel like they can influence outcomes. They feel as though they have a strong level of relationship with the people that they work with, and they feel that there is a strong sense of equality. And when we can create an environment that is positive in each of these ways, then it's consistent with an environment that has a high degree of psychological safety and an environment that has a high degree of engagement and therefore a high degree of performance. And my hope is that you can reflect on your work environment and reflect on some of the little things that could potentially be triggering people, some of the little things that might potentially be scarfing people towards the threat response. And maybe some of the tactics that I shared with you have got you thinking about how you might be able to reverse that trend and drive towards a more positive outcome. So on that note, we might open up for some questions from the audience, or anything that I can sort of help you with in terms of understanding and applying the SCARF model in your framework. So I'll pass back to you, Ebony, and you can hit me out with any questions that might be coming through.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Shannon. We do have a couple of questions. So we had a question from Rima when we were talking about relatedness, and their question was, how do you break the cycle? We were particularly talking about when someone is maybe being a little bit dismissive and you're trying to say, I know there's something wrong, but they're coming back saying maybe, no, it's fine. How do we break that cycle? Any tips there?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So when we've got that when we're checking in with someone who we sense, our spidey senses tell us that there's something wrong, yet they're being dismissive of that. How do we break that cycle? Yeah. Look, it's, again, there's other sort of elements of awareness of self and others that come into play when those things happen. And it's, I think if we've asked the question and we sense that, they're saying that they're fine, even though we sense that they're not, you've got to pick or choose. Do you want to ask again, or do you just want to retreat? Again, there's no, my view is anyway, that there's no right or wrong way, but it's about you just noticing what's going on energetically and being acutely aware of how you respond. And if you do want to ask again, but ask a little bit more delicately. So it might be, look, okay, I hear that you're saying you're fine, but my sense is that maybe something that's happened that's upset you, or maybe there was something that I said that might be, may have upset you a little bit. So please, if there is, I'm open to you sharing that with me. Right, so you just ask again, but you're a little bit more explicit and a little bit more delicate. On the flip side, you could also retreat, but don't just retreat and go, oh, fair enough then. Part of it is to say, oh, okay, look, I trust you if you say that you're fine. My sense is that maybe something's happened to upset you, and I just want you to know that if you want to talk about that, you can come and grab me, something along those lines. So either go again, or retreat, there's no right or wrong way, and it will depend upon the relationship and the person and the context. But what we do say is make an intentional choice one way or the other, and notice the response that you get and use that to inform your next step. It's not an easy thing to do. And it's why some people are a little bit more introverted and a little bit more closed off. Sometimes people just need a little bit of simmer time. Maybe they are particularly upset and they just need a little bit of time to settle themselves down a little bit, maybe to get rid of that emotional charge before they can have a rational conversation. So we need to be respectful of that. Not when someone says that they're fine, they're not always being dismissive. Sometimes they just need a little bit of time. So you've just got to play it by ear.
Thank you, Shannon. Another question here. How do you offset the threat response in a situation? And that's from Melissa.
So what was that? How do we offset a threat response with what?
In any situation, so offsetting that response that you're getting.
I think one of the things about a threat response, I think the SCARF model is really good. So one of the ways that we can use it is, let's say that in a particular environment, we notice that someone's behaviour is not what we intended for it. In other words, they seem overly defensive, or they have responded in a way where they have completely retreated from the interaction, or there's a way that we look at the behaviour and go, oh geez, that doesn't seem logical or rational with what I thought was going on here. So in that moment, what I always do is go, perhaps they've been scarfed in some way. So then we just replay the tape back for ourselves and go, okay, what's just happened? What happened in that meeting? What was the last email that I sent? What can I reflect on in the last couple of conversations that I've had with that person? And sometimes you can pick it up. Maybe it was something that you did or said, probably completely unintentionally and perhaps accidentally, but in a way, maybe I did diminish their idea. Maybe I robbed them from an opportunity of being autonomous. Maybe I made a decision that impacted their work and I didn't discuss that enough with them. So often we can reflect back and think about what happened, and then we can say, okay, what do I need to do to avoid that next time? So whenever we encounter those threat responses, go back, replay the tape, have a look, use the SCARF model as a bit of a framework, and use that to inform your next steps to make sure that we're maximising the reward response and moving against the threat response.
Great response. Thank you, Shannon. I might get a couple more questions in. So there is one here. In teams that are working mostly remotely with each other, what advice would you give when it's harder to read social cues and interactions are less frequent, and there's less opportunity for those water cooler conversations that may in the past have helped build, connection on a personal level?
Yeah, this is one of the big challenges, isn't it? Where, we don't get to meet that. So, if we're working in this perspective and someone might feel a little bit frustrated and we don't have the visual cue to see maybe a level of frustration or a level of disengagement from what's going on, really hard to tell. Or we can't just see them the other side of the office. We don't see them in the water cooler. So look, it probably requires a broader answer than we have time today. But my strong rule of thumb is that you need to think about all the things that potentially happen when we're working together that allow you to gain that level of insight, and ask yourself, righto, how do we potentially try to replicate that in the virtual space? I'll give you a quick example. What I'm talking about here is making the implicit explicit, right? So perhaps when we're working in a way that's co-located all in the office, perhaps there were certain rituals that happened where we all grabbed a coffee every Friday morning, or it just seemed that these two people went and had lunch together at the same time, or we would have a team meeting, and as part of the team meeting, we'd just spend a little bit of time at the start, sharing about what we did on the weekend. It wasn't a structural thing; it's just what happened, right? None of these things were procedures, or none of these things had rules, but they're just rituals that happen serendipitously. So then we need to say, okay, well, what do we need to do to allow those things to happen within the virtual space? When are we catching up within each other? What do those things need to look like? What are the rules of engagement when we are catching up? Is it cameras on? Is it cameras off? When are you taking the time to have those little casual conversations with people? You know, for example, I was talking to a leader just the other day, and he said one of the things that he works really hard at is just every now and again, if he thinks about one of his co-workers that isn't in the same environment, he'll just pick up the phone. He'll pick up the phone and call, "Hey, Ebony, how you going? Shannon here. I just was thinking about it. I just wanted to check in. How's your day going?" It's things like that where, again, these things happen accidentally when we're working in the office. We have to think about, well, what am I doing to make sure that these things are a little bit more explicit, given that my team is not working around me? It's much harder, but it requires a little bit of thinking.
Fantastic. And we've probably got time for one more. So I think I've picked one that I think is important. So hopefully you think the same. How do we apply the SCARF model with a staff member who doesn't respond well to feedback and has a tendency to overreact to any perceived slight?
Yeah. So a few thoughts on that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think for all of us as leaders to understand that when we are delivering feedback, you're going to get a SCARF response. You think about all of us in this room. Last time we got some feedback, particularly, let's assume that it's negative feedback. Let's make that assumption for a moment, where something that we've done wasn't, quite to standard, or we've let someone down in some way. The likelihood is that we didn't intend for that negative outcome to occur. So when someone gives us some feedback and brings that to our attention, there's a little bit of stuff that goes on. Maybe our status, maybe our relatedness that goes on. So we should anticipate that and be empathetic towards that. That's the first thing that I would say. However, the other thing to ponder is that if the response is significant, like in that question there's two ways to ponder this. First of all is to reflect on the way that you're delivering the feedback. I'm a big believer in, rather than blaming the other person for perhaps being a little bit overly emotional, or responding in a way that's irrational, or being a little bit too. Well, I had someone the other day say that this particular person was overly sensitive. Don't be the leader that does that. First and foremost, look at your own behavior and reflect deeply and honestly about how you have delivered the feedback, and think about how you could potentially deliver the feedback in a more SCARF-friendly way, if you like. Now, if you can look in the mirror and say, well, you know what, I hand on heart, there's nothing that I would do differently in terms of how I delivered that feedback. I delivered that feedback in a way that it was respectful, that was fair, that was reasonable. There's nothing that I would do differently. And you've still got that response, then I think that that's a conversation that you've got to have with that person to try to understand and seek some feedback on your feedback. Why have they responded that way? And I bet that what you'll find out is that there is an element of that SCARF piece that exists in terms of how they have interpreted and used your feedback. And sometimes we find out that it's actually got nothing to do with us. Sometimes this is just a cultural piece, or perhaps the previous managers that they've worked with were really poor at delivering feedback, or there's some other element to their past life, if you like, or their upbringing or their values that mean that that's just how they respond to feedback. And even that level of understanding from a leadership perspective can help us. It can, one, help us to have the conversation to set some expectations, but it can also inform how we might deliver feedback in the future. So 3 things just to summarize. First of all, have a bit of a look at how you are delivering the feedback, right? And just ask yourself, what can I do differently? Secondly, let's say that, all right, well, I'm clear of my conscience, then engage in a conversation, and you might find out about how you can deliver feedback in a slightly different way. Or third, you might find out that actually it's got nothing necessarily to do with you, or less to do with you and more to do with their own previous experience, etc. But nonetheless, we can have an expectation setting conversation to think about how we deliver feedback in the future.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, and thank you very much for your questions, everyone. Sorry we didn't get through all of them. We unfortunately look to be out of time. So I want to thank you, Shannon, once again for taking the time to share that with us. I found it to be a fantastic learning experience. Again, not my first session with you, always expected. For those joining us for the next session, we'll be back online in half an hour with Stephanie Thompson, exploring strategies and sharing practical advice on supporting a mentally healthy workplace. For those leaving us for the day, thank you very much for your attendance, and keep an eye out for the resources email. Also take some time to review what's on offer at the Institute. got some highly impactful intentional leadership programs, short courses, events. We've got short courses on things to help you communicate in your teams if you want to, look at that further, building that self-awareness piece. We've got lots and lots on offer. So just jump on our website. And thanks again and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.